Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wisconsin Idea Principal Preparation Career Outlook webinar. I want to thank you for being here this evening. And maybe just to get started, if you're comfortable and are able, I would invite you to drop in the chat where you're joining us from this evening, and we'll jump in. I am Tina Salzman, your host for this evening's webinar. I am a clinical professor in the Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis Department, otherwise known as ELPA. I'm also the director of the Wisconsin Idea Principal Prep Program and also our in-person K-12 leadership program as well. I come to this role with over 25 years of experience as an educator in the K-12 system and now higher education, specifically looking at the role of principals. And so it's my pleasure to be here with you all, and I want to thank you for spending part of your evening. One of the first things I would start with this evening is, as you think about launching your graduate studies at UW-Madison, it's important to maybe kind of understand context. We are number one among graduate schools of education in the United States, according to US News World Report. Additionally, our online master's program in educational administration and supervision is the number 2 ranked program. We're also number 4 ranked as far as educational administration among graduate schools. Number 1 among for master's in education programs for veterans, and of course on a more global stage, we are among the top best 20 schools of education according to the Times Higher Education. So all of that is to say, we are very proud of our legacy of excellence, and that we know that there are lots of other graduate programs. However, we pride ourselves in the pioneering work that happens not only in the School of Education and in our department, but certainly across the university. And so before we jump in, I'm going to give just a brief overview. We'll talk a little bit about our program, as well as the career outlook, which many of you are interested in hearing about tonight. But just to ground us, our program, as a reminder, if you don't already know, is an equity-focused program. And so we strive to really equip leaders with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to really advance and empower leaders to create more equitable systems. And sometimes that means disrupting the current system. The program is fully online. There are no in-person requirements. So we do have both synchronous online meetings, and then when classes are not meeting synchronously, we do have asynchronous work that students are engaged in. Students can complete this program in roughly 15 months. So that is, we are one of the fastest time to degrees programs available. It is a 30 credit program, and we do have rolling admissions for our students. So in our situation, what that means is from now through April 15th of 2026, we monthly are meeting as an admissions committee and considering completed applications that are coming in. And we will continue to admit students up until April 15th of 2026, or if we reach capacity before that date. And I would just say this, the program overall is really designed with working professionals in mind. As you'll see from some of the data that I'll share in a few minutes, by and large, our students come to us from the classroom, from other support positions, instructional positions like coaches in an educational setting, and thereby they are working as professionals in really the K-12 system or related systems as they are working through their graduate program. So in terms of career paths, when we think about, okay, I'm interested in this, I'm planning to apply for admissions to this particular graduate program, what does that mean in terms of my career paths? And ultimately, I think there are some logical paths that people ultimately take, but really what we see is After graduation, most of our students who are applying to receive a license from the Department of Public Instruction and have met those criteria are really beginning to think about stepping outside of the classroom. Oftentimes, that can mean assuming positions like a dean of students, maybe a department chair, an instructional coach. I kind of consider that, based on our data, to be the beginning of the on-ramp, if you will, into the administrative role and position. From there, we see most of our students pivoting or taking that next step, if you will, into positions like assistant principal, athletic director, principal, director of instruction, director of special education and pupil services, and even beyond. So I think it's important to note, you'll see athletic director on both of these lists, if that's something that is within your area of interest. That position does not require an administrative license. However, there are some high schools in particular, they tend to be the larger high schools that will require you to and want you to possess that athletic, or the administrative license. So what is the trajectory, if you will, of students who are graduating from this program? And there's a lot of numbers and lines on this particular slide, but I want to just briefly pull over to help you make sense of what you're seeing. So if you look to the far left before starting the program, what you're really seeing is a kind of an outlook or a profile, if you will, of students in our program and the roles that they are in prior to starting the program. So generally about 88% of our students are sitting, they're in positions like a classroom teacher, somewhere in the K-12 system. About 39% are in these other non-instructional roles, and oftentimes, quite honestly, they are either in a dean position, which does not require an administrative license, or they're in some sort of instructional coaching role. You'll notice, of course, if you're adding up the numbers, they do not add up to 100. And I'll just make a note that is because sometimes students are coming in and they're actually in their split positions. So they might be part-time classroom teacher and part-time instructional coach, and therefore it does it does show in our numbers. So when you look at this particular slide over time, you can see that there's an overall downward trajectory for people on the blue line. And what that's ultimately showing you is that generally, once people are graduated from our program, within the 2 to 3 years after, they are stepping into leadership kinds of positions. And so all the way to the right, you'll see 4 years after graduation, almost all of our students have assumed some sort of leadership role after graduation. And then similarly, you can see from the orange line, how many of those roles specifically are related to either the assistant principalship or the principalship. And so sort of collectively, or the takeaway here is that within just a few years post-graduation, students feel equipped and are seeking opportunities to really assume these critical and important roles in schools. So you're considering this role. There's a overall trajectory that you can see based on our student data from students who are completing our program. I think it's also important to maybe look at what is the overall salary look like for students who are considering these roles. And so this information is taken from Glassdoor.com. Of course, these are estimates, but overall, you can get a general sense of the pay range, and certainly important to account for the numbers of positions. So just under the salaries, you can see that just in Wisconsin public schools alone, there are roughly 1,800 administrator positions, 920 assistant principal positions, 400 or so positions in the area of Director of Special Education, and then an additional 280 in the area of Director of Instruction. Of course, it goes without saying that as people are stepping into these roles, they're of course assuming more responsibility, and with that, the compensation is addressed accordingly. A couple of examples or testimonials, if you will, from our past graduates. These are just 4 students that I've highlighted here. One of our most recent graduates, Allie, she was previously an elementary school teacher for several years and then graduated this past summer and started a job as a dean of students at a middle school in the same district. And she was actually recruited out of her position in the elementary school by the principal, who knew that she was completing this program. Similarly, Brian, he was a student in one of our early cohorts, was a high school teacher for several years, graduated, actually accepted a position in another district, and then they recruited him back to his previous district because he was missed, and they really felt that he had a skill set that aligned with their goals and their vision in the district. And there are 2 others. I won't read those to you, but when you do receive this recording, I would just point out that the bottom 2 students, both Tim and Josh, those are also hyperlinks, so you can click on those and it will take you to our website and you can read more about their profiles and what they had to say about their time in the program. And so we talk about the program as a opportunity to acquire the learning and the skills and necessary tools to be an effective leader. What does that look like in terms of compensation? And then, of course, the trajectory, but important to also talk about why effective leadership matters. And so oftentimes students who come to this program, one of the concerns is not wanting to necessarily step outside of their classroom, because the fear might be that they are leaving behind these really valuable connections and relationships that they are building with students and families. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that while you are stepping outside of a classroom, you are assuming a much broader scope of your work and opportunity to affect the school as a whole. And so I think just thinking about, okay, so what is the effect of leaders and why does that matter? Well, impact on students is second only to an effective classroom teacher when we talk about principals. An effective principal has a really impactful, I guess, not representation, but they have a profound impact on what is happening in the school, which thereby affects student outcomes. We can see that because of the second bullet point, effective principals have magnitude and scope. It's not just affecting one classroom per se, but now principals are really having an impact across the school, across departments, across grade levels, etc. Effective principals are also positively impacting student achievement because oftentimes they're handling critical pieces like attendance and discipline. And so we know that we can't teach students who aren't there. And so by working in some of those critical areas, they're thereby not only supporting the classroom teacher, but also really working to ensure students are present in order to receive and engage with instruction. And then lastly, effective principals are also positively impacting teacher retention and overall job satisfaction. It's no secret that within the last few years, Wisconsin in particular, but certainly as a nation, we have faced teacher shortages. Principals play a key role in positively impacting teacher retention. Oftentimes you might hear the phrase, teachers don't leave jobs, they leave bad leaders. And I think to some degree that is likely true. And so being an effective leader has and can have a profound impact on overall teacher retention and satisfaction. So what does this all mean in terms of requirements and thinking forward into a future post-completion of your program? Well, it certainly begins with completing a program like the Wisconsin Idea Principal Prep Program. Candidates must also have a valid or be eligible to hold a valid Tier 2 license in teaching, and also have 6 semesters of successful full-time classroom teaching experience. Now, if you are in the pupil services realm, there is also the kind of corresponding stipulation that candidates must have the 540 hours of experience through that role. Additionally, oftentimes we have folks come to our program and might indicate that they're not necessarily aspiring to that building principal role. However, they do have aspirations to at some point hold the director of instruction or the director of special education and pupil services. And so in order to acquire those specific licenses, there are 2 additional courses along with a 75-hour field experience that is required for each of those specific licenses. This is a peek at what your course sequence would be in the Wisconsin Idea Principal Prep Program. Your first summer, there are 3 classes. And then by the first fall, you are moving into 2 classes and also beginning your state required field experience in educational leadership. The field experience spans 2 semesters, both the fall and the spring. And there's a set of required experiences that you ultimately move through with your corresponding supervising administrator. I would say generally about 95% of our students complete the field experience in the building where they currently are working, although that is not a requirement. Students are able to work with someone who is outside of their building, although generally because people are working as they're working their way through graduate school, generally our students find it much easier and less time constraints to work with the administrator in their building. And then during that final summer, when you are wrapping up the program, you have 2 classes. And then there is the final portfolio requirement, which of course, if you're currently in education, you know about PI 34, which also applies to anyone acquiring a new license in administration. The great thing about our portfolio process is as you work through all of the classes outlined on this slide, you ultimately are creating artifacts, assignments, group projects, etc., that are aligned to the final portfolio. So in that final summer, you're really spending time determining which artifacts align with your portfolio, as well as writing the accompanying reflections that are part of or that are aligned to each one of the domains. And so across the 5 domains, those reflections are important because they're part of the connective tissue to talk about your learning, the impact of the artifacts with regard to your future leadership. So where to go from here? Really, if you are taking that next step and want to begin the application process, there are a few key pieces for you to know. There is, as part of the application process, an essay statement. So this is no more than 2 pages, and there are questions that are highlighted on our website. I won't get too far into those. Just know the purpose of this one is, to learn more about you as a potential student in our program. It's also a writing sample. As we mentioned, this is a rigorous accelerated program, and so we want to ensure that our students, really have the skills necessary to be successful. And then additionally, to learn a little bit more about any equity work and your thinking around, where you're currently at, experiences that you've had that may have helped shape your thinking and desire to be part of an equity-focused program. Additionally, you can submit your unofficial transcripts Please, this should not be your official transcript copy yet, just your unofficial, your resume or CV, and then 3 letters of recommendation. And just a note here, it's really important to make sure that you are asking people who are qualified to speak to your academic and professional competence. Oftentimes, I try to encourage students, at least one of those letters should come from someone who is in a supervision relationship. In other words, a building principal, an assistant principal, a director, or even the superintendent would qualify. Next, there is a 3.0 GPA requirement. However, oftentimes there might be some really valid reasons why someone may not have acquired that 3.0 in their prior higher ed experience. And so you are able to submit an accompanying document that addresses why that does not necessarily or accurately reflect your full potential for a leadership role and for a rigorous graduate program like ours. And then finally, as I previously mentioned, the deadline is April 15th, and up until then, we have rolling admissions. So we just had our October admissions meeting, and we will have our next one, I believe, sometime mid-November. And with that, I want to thank you for being here this evening. My contact information, my email, that's oftentimes the best way to reach me. And then there's also my office phone. Additionally, I've included my TA, Victor Escalona. He is really a program assistant and very well versed in this program as well as our in-person program, and is more than happy to also connect with students if you can't get a hold of me, which I don't think that would be the case, but in the event that maybe you're more comfortable talking to Victor or want a student's perspective, you are more than welcome to reach out to Victor as well. And so with that, I want to thank you for being here this evening, and I will open it up for questions.